Well, let me say good evening. Good evening to those of you who are here physically. Good evening to those of you who are tuning in to us this evening. This is a town hall discussion on community policing. Our community is, we're the kind of folk where we love to talk about things, and any conversation is up for grabs. But we do it in the wrong places. We do it in the barbershops and the beauty salons. We do it in the chat rooms, but rarely do we do it with people who can answer those questions. And so tonight we're going to have a discussion on community policing. This idea came about after what transpired in Memphis, Tennessee. And from that discussion, and I had my own opinions about it, but I wanted to hear from law enforcement so that they could share their views, their thoughts, not just about Memphis, but just about policing in general. And so I reached out to these three individuals who are members of Messiah, and they serve in the community. And I just invited them, encouraged them, begged them just to come and to share. And so tonight's town hall discussion is about community policing. We have three people who will be guiding us through these series of topics. The first is Kim Woods. Kim Woods has been in law enforcement for 26 years, and for 25 of those years, she has been with the Irvington Police Department. Currently, she is part of the ballistics unit at Irvington and also out of Essex County. And so Kim will be here not only to share in some responses, but to lead the discussion, to lead the dialogue. And so we welcome Kim tonight. Next, we have Keith Alston Jr. Keith has been in law enforcement since 2013. He is an officer, he is a sergeant for the East Orange Police Department, and currently he provides executive protection unit supervisor. He's a protective supervisor for the mayor. Basically, he's part of the mayor's security detail. And so Keith has recently joined Messiah, grateful for his presence, and he'll be sharing his perspectives. And then lastly, we have Brother Dalton Price. Dalton is a retired officer from the Patterson Police Department. He served in that capacity for 25 years, a long range of responsibilities. But currently, Dalton, he's wearing a couple of hats even after retirement. He's the Director of Security and Emergency Preparedness for the Patterson School District, and also he serves as an adjunct professor at Felician University, along with being a New Jersey State Certified Academy instructor of racially influenced policing, cultural diversity, and crisis intervention. Just a side note, Dalton was one of the first people I met when I arrived in New Jersey. My wife and I got to know him and his wife, and I'm just grateful that our paths have come full circle, and he and his wife share are now part of the Messiah family. So these are our panelists for tonight. We're going to have a Q&A, not only for those here physically, but to those of you who might be watching by live stream. We have three categories we're going to be discussing tonight. The first is community policing. We've got some prepared questions that we're going to ask. Kim is going to ask Dalton and Keith. And then following that, we'll have a Q&A from you all or anyone in the chat room regarding community policing. The second will be use of force and how force is used, how it's exercised as officers. They'll have a discussion with that, and then we'll have Q&A regarding that. And then lastly, we'll talk about mental health and trying to navigate policing with the mental health issues in our community, and then we'll wrap up with Q&A with that. I would just ask this to those in the chat room and those of you who are here physically. First and foremost, we are respectful of all persons. So if you got an axe to grind tonight with policing in general, this is not the place. Secondly, if you have questions, please allow those questions to be basically in context of the categories that we're talking about. Please don't bring up your parking ticket and why you got pulled over for speeding. That's not the place for this. We're going into deeper waters. Amen. If you got a question about your parking ticket, call the officer or go down to the precinct. But tonight we want to understand policing in our community. So as we start off the discussion, I have a question for all three of you, and you can engage in that, and then we'll get into our other questions. What made you get into policing? What led you into having being a police officer as your career? We'll start there and go from there. All right.
Good evening. To answer your question, I considered this career at a very early age, I must say. It's something that I've always known that I've wanted to do, to be in law enforcement, but I never looked at it as just a career. For me, I considered it more of my calling in life, to be of service to my community, not just for my family, to take care of, to be able to provide for them, but just being of service. That's something that was instilled in me at an early age, and it has carried me throughout. And I consider that being a beacon of light to people at their darkest hour, going through various traumatic events. And I'm just there to offer whatever service and resource that I can to them, to sort of just to be there in a time of need, to do whatever I can for them to get them through a traumatic event.
Good evening. I became a police officer so that I could change the world, because I thought I could. And once I became a police officer, I realized I could not change the world, but I could do my part to make it better. So every day, whether it's policing or even now today, I strive to make sure that I do my part to make it better. If I can help someone, I help them. It's also part of the career. Policing is a protect and serve industry. The responsibility is to protect and serve. So I took the job so I could protect and serve. And sometimes that service part becomes a little difficult, because it's more than helping an old lady cross the street or talking to students or doing those things. Sometimes you do have to make an arrest. Sometimes you do have to use force. But understand that when you're doing those things as a part of the job, you're also doing your duty and you're supplying a service. So it's hard to understand those things when you first start policing. You come in, you're young, you think you can help everyone, you realize you can only help those that want to be helped. But in the long run, you learn very quickly that this is a job of service. And you spend more time being a service to people than you do making arrests.
Mine is a little bit twofold and straightforward. I had family members as police officers. My mentor was a police officer, is still currently a police officer. And I kind of got pushed in that direction. So that's where I was being led. The second part of that is a little different. I've had some incidents growing up as a youth with police. Not going to say specifically, but those incidents kind of led me to, okay, if I am going to get into this profession, can I be the change I want to see from within? So that became my mindset when I became a cop. But for the most part, I became a cop because I was pretty much led through my family. So that's how I became a police officer.
Thank you, gentlemen. As we continue on with our discussion for this evening, as Pastor Owens mentioned, we're going to start with community and police. So my first question to you, gentlemen, is, would you agree that there's a communication barrier between the community and law enforcement?
Absolutely. And the communication issue, we're not going to point fingers and say whose problem it is. It's the police have an issue dealing with the community, but the community has an issue communicating with the police. It's a relationship. We live together, we work together. But in a relationship, especially for those of us who are married, we understand one of us have to take the step to bridge the gap, to help the relationship, to make sure it gets better. And if I sit back and say, I'm not going to take the first step, and the person on the other side said they're not going to take the first step, nothing gets accomplished. So in order to break that communication barrier, someone has to take the first step to say, hey, let's have a conversation. Let me ask you about what you do. And I think, from the police standpoint, I think it should be the police responsibility to make the first step. But from a community standpoint, I think it should be the community's perspective to take the first step. In other words, any one of us can take the first step to break that communication barrier, and I think that's where the issue is. We don't spend enough time trying to learn the people that are standing across from us, whether they're a police officer, fireman, teacher, but it's a good idea to try to learn what these folks deal with every day, whether it's the community or the police, and I think that will break down the communication gap, and it has to be purposeful. It can't be just, let's see what happens. I am intentionally trying to have a conversation with you to change your relationship or your perspective on policing. Or am I intentionally having a conversation with you to change your perspective on or the community or the black community, whatever it may be. But my purpose is intentional in this process.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna double down on that. For the most part, I'm gonna say yes to. But I'm also gonna say forums like this is important to bridge that gap, as well as the organizations that we both represent. One of the reasons why the Bronze Shields was started, especially in this community, was to try to be that bridge builder. So I believe the forums are important. I believe to build that necessary back and forth. So I just can't double down and say it's just the community got to step up. But I will say the community does need to step up, because when the city has community forums, the community needs to come out. That's where your local police department is, your local representative is there at these city community meetings, whether it be the council person, the mayor, or any other city official that may host it. The community needs to come out, because those are the places where you can ask those necessary questions. But forums like this, through your local churches or local organizations, also help bridge that gap, so we can both have that back and forth community communication between them both.
Thank you. So my next question is, what message would you communicate to the public when interacting with the police?
I guess the message could be that I'm human. I'm human, I understand you, and I want you to try to understand me. And that is the perfect thing you can do to a person to help them to see you. Because sometimes people don't see police as being human. They don't understand what you do, they don't understand who you are. They think you are the person that wrote them the ticket a few days ago. And it's hard to believe. I know it's hard to believe, but 1.3 million police officers in the country, we are not all the same. So in order for me to get you to understand that, I have to be different. I have to show you that I'm different than the negative reaction that you've gotten from other police officers. And again, it has to be intentional.
I'm gonna say be positive. Let's start engaging in a positive manner. I'm gonna use this example. As a cop, sometimes, you come into a local store, you maybe see a parent with a small child. That parent says to the officer, if you keep being bad, he's gonna get you. Let's not do that. You're already starting a cycle of negativity towards the police, even at a young age, even if it's in a joking manner. But if we be positive, we may have a better interaction by saying, hey, did you see this police officer that looks like you? Who's from here, just like you? You could be like him one day, the same. Those interactions are much better than having that type of negative connotation already placed in that child's mind very, very young. And we already perpetrating a cycle very young without even knowing we did that. That's what I'm gonna leave it there.
If I could add to that, when you're being purposeful, and I will tell you from experience, things that I have done, you're standing in the line at the local coffee shop, the one with the orange sign on it, you know what that is. And they sell the power rings. I know you guys think they're donuts, but they're not. They're power rings for police officers. So you're in line at the Dunkin' Donuts, and the person is standing behind you, and they start to have a conversation. They may say, officer, thank you for your service, or just start asking you questions. I would get to the register, and when I get my food, I would pay for that person's food. Not a meal, but a donut, cup of coffee. You tell the person behind the register, put this on my tab. That gives that person a different perspective of police. That gives them the opportunity when someone else is saying something negative, they get to say, you know what, I ran into this cop a month ago, and we were just talking, and he paid for my coffee. And it lets that person, gives that person opportunity to see policing a little bit differently because you took a step. So again, it has to be purposeful, but these are the things that police can do. By the same token, I've been in the line, and gotten to the drive-thru to pick up my coffee, and they've told me the person in front of you paid for your coffee. It helps me and gives me a different belief in humanity. So it does go both ways.
Before I'm gonna double down on that as well, because sometimes people do think we aren't human. We are human, and we are real people. We go through real things. So I just want to double down on that.
Now, with that being said, let me ask you this. As law enforcement officers, how do you think we can overcome the perception of being the enemy within our communities?
That is a good question. I can't make myself not be your enemy. What I can do is make sure that I treat you right. Because if you have a perspective about me as a person or about me as in my uniform, I don't think I can change that. Okay, I can do my part to be a better person, to be a better human, but when you're trying not to be the enemy, and you're only the enemy to folks when they're doing something wrong. Because when I'm giving mouth to mouth to your grandmother, your grandfather, you don't see me as the enemy. You see me as a person that helped your family member. So sometimes the police are enemies to the people who are doing wrong and tearing up our community. And trying to fix that is a struggle, but we have to make sure that we're doing the right thing, especially for the right people.
So I'm gonna go back to my last answer. It starts with that very positive interaction, so we can stop that cycle early on. But I'm also gonna go down with these organizations, because organizations like us, we believe in give back. So I believe if we're giving back positively to the community the right way, you're seeing local law enforcement back in the community, passing out coats, giving out food. You see us providing some type of resources, not just in that negative aspect of arrest or having a bad day. If you see us while having good days at church, at functions, I think that helps that same enemy connotation go away. And I think that's how we do that. And I think the organization's commitment to doing that will help. Does law enforcement need to better engage? I mean, we can say yes. I'm not going to say too much on that. I am still active, so I got to put that disclaimer out there.
I'll say it.
But it also comes back to just seeing us, you know. I know we want to see the officers back in the community, walking on the block, you know, having these positive interactions. That's how we do it.
What Keith didn't want to say that I will say is that these things start at the top. Okay, if the police chief believes in community policing, or let me change the phrase, believes in community and policing. When you use the term community policing, people think that it's the police officer's job just to be the nice person. I like to use the term community and policing. If the police chief believes in community and policing, it should be pushed down. It has to be pushed down from the top. You can't expect the police officer coming out of the academy to exercise community and policing when it's not being mandated from the top. It has to be mandated from the top. There has to be continuous training, and you have to take the opportunity to tell officers it's okay to take some time to be nice to people. You have to let the officer know it's okay to call on the radio to say, whatever the code we're using today, you're having a conversation with a community member. If that's not being pushed down, then officers are going from job to job to job, and they don't have the time to stop and talk to the community because the chief executive hasn't given them that power. So it does have to come from the top.
Thank you, gentlemen. As we continue on, let me ask you this. What does defunding the police mean to you?
Before I turn this over to the expert, the leading expert, I'm gonna pass on this one. I'm disclaimer, I am an active officer. I'm only speaking on behalf of the East Orange Bronze Shields. With that being said, I'm gonna say this. I do believe in adding resources, having mental health professionals along with the police. I believe in that. I'm not even gonna get into a conversation about defundment, but that should be additional, not talking about cuts.
I will be delicate. I am not a fan of defunding the police. I'm not a fan of defunding anyone. When you talk about taking money from any type of entity, when you take money away, you take away services. So that's the issue. So defunding and just taking away money from a police department, fire department, anyone creates an issue. But like Keith mentioned, to add resources is what needs to be done. And I will say, police officers need better resources. And those resources are out there. We just have to find a way to bring the folks in that can give those resources. And defunding, and I believe that the folks who started talking defunding, I believe that their position wasn't necessarily negative. What they wanted was resources. And because we want resources, we want the police to pay for it out of your budget. That's probably not going to happen. However, with that, how can we add some resources to the police department? Can the police officer, the police department afford to pay some of these resources? Because when you start looking at a line item or a line item budget for a police department, when you talk defunding, you're talking about hiring less police officers, which means less service. Let's find a way to add some services and resources to the police department, and you change the whole conversation. And when you say that to people, more times than not, they say, well, that's what I really mean. But they mention defunding, and when they mention defunding, police get a little offended. But there's a real conversation about defunding, and it's more like Keith said, adding resources to the police department. The more tools that a police officer has, the better police officer he is. And it's common sense. It doesn't sound normal, but if the only tool I have is a hammer, every situation to me is a nail. You give me more tools, more things to work with, community service, community policing. Do I have resources at welfare? Can I call someone who's looking for somewhere to live because I had a conversation with them? Can I get them into social services? Can I help them? And if you give police those resources, if it's just a card to hand to someone that says, listen, this is where you can get food, that's a resource. And these are the kind of resources that police need to be better equipped with, because it's just another tool in helping police to get the job done. Because most folks, when they're in a crisis, the first person they run into is a police officer. And again, that police officer needs the resources to help service that person.
I'm also going to say partnerships. Partnerships.
At this point in time, we're going to take a few minutes just to open up for discussion from anyone for the audience. If you have any questions, at this time, we would ask that you would raise your hand and we would bring the mic to you.
Yes.
You had mentioned resources. Could you give us you gave a couple examples, like what specifically, could you share some of the other resources? I like the idea of you saying, or maybe you didn't, but like a ShopRite card. Like would police or would the city partner with police, law enforcement to say give a $10, $25 ShopRite cards. And if you see someone on the street or you see someone that you feel might need something, maybe they could, a officer could give a ShopRite card, or maybe give the Dunkin' Donuts, just
right.
something that. So I don't know if you meant that as a resource. So could you sort of define what you mean by resources?
Sure. As far as what you said, the ShopRite card, that's a resource that doesn't necessarily have to come from the agency, because I know Kim and Keith will agree. There are times that we as police officers have brought food for people, okay, bought groceries for people. That's something as an officer, you can easily buy groceries for a person that will change their lives. But more resources, I do mean crisis intervention. The police officer on the street needs to have access, because they do have training in crisis intervention, but it's limited. You need to have that resource that someone's in a crisis, that you can really call someone, or you can refer to them someone. You can give them a phone number. You can put them on the phone with someone right now who can talk to them about the crisis that they're in. So those are the kind of resources that I mean. It would be nice if East Orange Police Department was giving out ShopRite cards to police officers to hand out to people. But I will tell you, Keith doesn't need a ShopRite card. Keith would not have an issue with someone who needs a resource buying them a meal. Really, I mean, not just someone asking, but buying someone a meal. I've done it. Bought groceries, showed up at someone's house because you were there on assignment and you've seen the circumstance. Go to the store, get some groceries, not McDonald's, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, but come back with 2 or 3 bags of groceries to help a family. And I've known many cops that would do it and that have done it. I've seen it. The only issue with policing, I will tell you, police are the worst when it comes to promoting themselves. The things I've seen police officers do for people in the neighborhood, and if someone would ask them about it, they would never tell you they're doing it. Having a trunk full of candy for Halloween and giving it out to kids, but if you ask the officer about it, he would kind of downplay the whole thing. So these things get done. So we don't need, again, we don't need the agency necessarily to provide those things. Of course, it would help Keith if he did have the money from them versus his own, but for the most part, we need real resources that we can call and point to as an agency to say, we're all working together. Partnerships. I have someone you can call. I can get you food today. I also have someone that I can call to help you get food on a regular basis. And those are the kind of things. We have them.
Tim, we can't have a conversation like this because the live stream is watching. So we just need you. No, they can't hear you on live stream without the mic.
To answer your question, these resources exist, but these resources aren't brought together. So when we're talking policing, the resources exist all over the city. The police just are not tied into these resources, and some police officers may not know they exist, especially if you're not from East Orange. You become a cop here, you don't know they exist, so you can't introduce these resources to people. So they are out there. But any resource that you think a police officer has or needs, you can bring it up to your local police department and says, hey, I think maybe you can add this. Maybe this will be better. There's folks that need this. And they may tell you, we can't do it, but here's who can do it. But you have to have a conversation about that.
We got another question. Yes, ma'am.
But can I answer? Can I just add to this one real quick before that? So, just to kind of piggyback off that. I mean, I happen to work for a gentleman that actually does that. I mean, you know as well as I know. But the resources part, when we're talking about it, what he was talking about, the crisis intervention is very important because remember we're not mental health professionals, but we're asked to engage with people that may have mental health disabilities. So to have that added resource would provide a better outcome than necessarily something of a negative aspect, if that makes sense. You know, we're trying to avoid the worst possible outcome. We're trying to have the best possible outcome for every call or service that we respond to. So that when we talk about resources, we're talking about direct resources that would benefit a call or service to not have the worst but the best outcome. Those other things you were talking about, I mean, we can double down on the city, or we can partner with the city. Our organization does things, Passaic County organization does things, the North organization does things. So each of our organizations do things with the community to give back. So we can absolutely take that and double down on that. But when we're talking about specifically that crisis intervention, because when that conversation about defunding police came, it was mostly about the mental health aspect and dealing with that. And that was a national conversation.
Yes, I would just like to go back to what she said about having a ShopRite card. I really get very nervous about that because of the fact that people will take a card and sell it to somebody else for money. Now, there have been 2 occasions where I have been approached for people asking me for money. I said to them, if you're hungry, I'll buy you a meal. I do not believe in like giving people money on the street if they ask for it, because I feel if you're hungry, I'll buy you a meal. And I don't know if that helps, but that's my feeling, because I just feel that people will take a ShopRite card and go sell it and for other purposes. So that was my response to the giving people ShopRite cards. Thank you.
Okay, we got a couple more hands. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking to the issue of the public viewing police officers as enemies at times, or just the lack of trust, has any of your departments actually, or do they incorporate the community in their policy development or review process? For example, one of the good things that have come out of the consent decree in the city of Newark is the review process for policy and policy development now incorporates community members so that they're actually able to give their perspective on what they would think or how they would react if they were on the receiving end of an officer acting out of that policy. Do any of your departments have that in place? Has it been discussed, and what is your viewpoint on community involvement in the policy development and review process?
What I will say is the agency I did work for at the time did not engage in that kind of conversation. It just wasn't something that had hit the table. I don't think it was avoided. It just was not on the table to have. But that is a real conversation, because once you have that conversation, you bring the community in, you get their viewpoint, but you also get to share your viewpoint, and you get to explain to the community why this is. What the conversation comes down to, there's something called a rule of law. There's things that don't look right, it don't look legal, but it is. So you have to explain to the community that based on the rule of law, this is legal. But this comes out of the conversation like you said, when you bring the community to the table and have them involved in the policies and let them look at policies and understand why the policy was written, does it need to be changed, what changes are going to be made, what changes have been made. So a lot of times these things do take place. By and large, people may not know about this conversation. But it is fair to bring the community in, especially folks who are really asking the question and looking for an honest answer. All of us are not looking for an honest answer. We want to just change what we think is wrong. But the rule of law helps people to understand this is what the law says, this is what's right, and this is what's wrong.
I think that was a perfect segue into my question in regards to getting the community involved in a lot of the activities or issues that permeate the community. My question to you folks are, what is your opinion on civilian review boards? I mean, obviously, you know, every municipality is different. I've heard it discussed before, and I think that's one of the hot subjects, just like defunding the police. So what are your views on that?
I would say this. I believe in review. I believe in civilian review. The only issue is there is a way to do it. Again, we talk about the rule of law. So in order to have a civilian review board, I believe that folks have to be trained on how it's going to be done. How do we do this? You have to be able to look at the law and understand the law. And at that point, you can make a decision on whether or not you think the police officer was right, whether he was wrong, or whether you cannot come to a conclusion based on what he's accused of. But you can't have a civilian review board who says, well, I think that Keith was wrong on this one. That's not how this works. You're talking about someone's livelihood. You're talking about taking away someone's house, college funds, and other things based on an opinion. So you can have a civilian review board, but just like New York City does, it's based on a rule of law. You have to be able to look at the law and make a decision on whether it's right based on the law and not based on opinions. And you have to be able to follow that. So I'm not against civilian review boards. I think you could have them. I think you probably should have them. However, there is a way to put them in place so that everyone's protected. I would not want to be faced with someone, you got 9 people who don't like cops, and all of a sudden I'm standing in front of them trying to save my house and everything else over something that I wasn't wrong at. If I broke the law, I broke the law, but not because someone's opinion is, well, I just think, in my opinion, that he's wrong. It doesn't fly. But I am in favor of having civilian review boards.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your questions. At this time, we are going to continue on to the next module, which is enforcing the law. So the first question I have for you is, do you think officers today display a lack of care and empathy towards the community they serve?
We just had this conversation on the way here. I think that people display a lack of empathy towards each other. There are some mean people in this world. There's some disrespectful people in this world. There's people who just have no respect for humanity, period. And some of these people become police officers. And this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people who have bad attitudes and become police officers. Now, how do you teach that out? The only way to teach that out is to watch them, monitor them, pay attention to demeanor complaints. If an officer has a certain amount of demeanor complaints, you may need to sit down and talk to him about how he's acting on motor vehicle stops, how he's talking to people. Have a conversation with him to get him trained so this goes well. But again, you're talking about human beings acting a certain way. So when you start talking about the fact of how police officers act in a certain situation, sometimes you have a bad cop who happens to be a bad person. And it's hard to fix, but you have to weed them out. If this is your issue, if you can't do policing the way it deserves to be done, maybe you don't need to be a police officer. There's someplace else you can go and you can take your attitude with you, but this is not the place for that type of attitude. You have to be able to treat people the way they deserve to be treated. If you have to fight with someone, you have to fight with them, but you don't need to pick a fight. You don't need to be nasty with people when there's no reason to be nasty. So this is a human thing more than a police thing. And again, bad people become police officers, which is why you have bad police officers.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, the general answer is no. That's like assuming that the officer just decided to become a cop to terrorize the community. And that's not the case. I don't believe that's the case. Like Dalton said, you can't change people. Just like any other job, you have some bad apples, and it's our job to weed those bad apples out when it happens, and that's how it comes down to. I hate to put it so black and white, but it pretty much comes down to that. It comes down to the fact that they go through a hiring process, they pass the hiring process, we don't know who those people are until they show themselves, and then once they show themselves, it's our job to step up and make sure we can push them out. But other than that, coming into it, no, I don't believe that's the case.
Thank you. Now let me ask you this. You mentioned, Dalton, about motor vehicle stops. Do you think you approach motor vehicle stops differently depending upon the driver of the vehicle?
I want to say no, but the answer is yes. And the reason the answer is yes, I will tell you this. If this young man, Lawson, he's driving reckless, and I pull him over. He's young, he ran a stop sign. How I approach him may be totally different than I approach the young lady sitting here in the front. When I see her and she ran a stop sign, my attitude to myself, I'm gonna talk to them both the same way, but how I feel is a little bit different based on the age difference. So this is what changes. Am I gonna be nasty to him? Absolutely not. I'm not gonna be nasty to him. At the same time, am I a little bit nicer to her? The answer is yes. I am gonna be a little bit more delicate when I'm talking to her versus when I'm talking to him. So, and this is just the truth of the conversation because we're talking about human beings. Again, I didn't degrade him, I didn't talk down to him, but I do feel a little bit differently when I'm stopping her, because my chances are I'm stopping her to advise her, ma'am, you ran a stop sign. These are the things I'm saying. I'm probably not saying, sir, you ran a stop sign. It's probably gonna be, do you know why I stopped you? You ran a stop sign. So it's a little bit different because of we're human. And I see you looking at me thinking, why? But I'm human. I'm gonna treat this young lady a little bit nicer than I'm gonna treat him. Again, I'm not gonna be nasty to him. I'm not gonna be mean to him. But my personality is she gets a little bit delicate treatment. And if anybody can't understand that, I can't help you.
I'm obviously from a different generation. I'm sitting here with tattoos on my arm. So let's be clear, for me, that's no. I'm not gonna treat it any differently. Maybe it's a generation thing. For me, I'm gonna come at it the same, whether it be Brother Alston or it be my grandmother, for instance. So I think that comes down to a generational thing. Every cop is different. We can't even speak for a different race, but for me, the answer is no. I approach it the same. You gotta have that awareness as a cop, period, for your own safety purposes, but I'm not gonna treat anybody any differently because of how he may look, because to me, he looks like me. So it's not gonna change the fact. We're gonna have the same type of conversation, and based on that conversation is how the interaction is gonna go. So for me, no, there's no difference.
Let me say this, since we're on motor vehicle stops. Motor vehicle stops and domestic violence incidences are the #1 causes for police officer deaths. Motor vehicle stops and domestic violence incidences are the #1 reason for police officer in the line of duty deaths. So when you get pulled over, understand we're a little bit heightened because this is where people get hurt. So you have to act a certain way. You have to bring a certain attitude with yourself, not towards anyone, but just understand this is a very dangerous situation, because what you know when Keith pulls you over is that Keith is a police officer. What Keith doesn't know is that you got warrants out of North Carolina for shooting someone. He has no idea, but it's a motor vehicle stop, and it is a heightened sense of awareness when you look at certain people in a car, because you don't know who that person is. So domestic violence and motor vehicle stops are #1, and that just raises the sensitivity level just a little bit.
Hence why I said I wouldn't change it. I mean, y'all see Medea. Medea carried that thing in her purse. Can't treat it any differently.
Okay, as we continue on, let me ask you this. What does justice look like to you?
All right. So for this question, for this question, I'm gonna give the definition of justice. The definition of justice is a concept of moral rightness based on ethics, rationality, law, natural law, religion, and equity. Anybody want to tell me what that means? Right? So when I give the definition of justice, you're like, okay, what does that mean? What does natural law mean? I give you the definition of natural law. A body of unchanging moral principles regarded as a basis for all human conduct. They also liken it to the First Amendment. It gives individuals who believe that laws are unjust a way to oppose them. Justice. So the easy question, what does justice look like? No easy answer, because for different people it's different. Justice is different for everybody. When I looked up this word natural law, because I'm trying to figure out what natural law was, in the definition, somebody actually put Dr. King invoked natural law in opposing racial segregation. Did he receive justice? So the easy answer is, what is justice? Justice under the law is what's deserved for the crime, right? The punishment that comes with the crime. That's the easy answer. There's no easy answer for justice. That's all I can put for that.
The question of justice is, what does justice look like to you? And justice does not look the same for all of us. So I'm being delicate because my wife told me not to give my original answer, but I will say this. Justice is when you believe in the court system. This is our idea, not Keith's definition. This is our idea. We want justice. We want justice. We say that. We believe that. But I'll give you this situation. I believe in the law of the country and of the United States. I believe that a person commits a crime, you should get charged, you should go through the criminal justice system, and however you come out on the other side, that is justice. I believe that. However, put your hands on my wife. Do I want justice, or am I going to take care of this myself? So what exactly do we call justice? Those are the conversations we need to have. And I can say this because it's honest. When you look at some of the situations and you see, especially when you see a white cop shot and killed a black person, and you think that the white cop was wrong, you really believe he was wrong. My question is, do you want justice, or do you want the white cop to go to jail? There is a difference. There's a huge difference. Justice is he goes through the system, and whatever the system decides, I'm satisfied with. And that's not the case. Not always. Sometimes we want him to go to jail because of what I've seen him do. I don't want him to go through the system and the system says he's not guilty. That's not what I want. This is what I want. So when we ask for justice, we have to be careful. And if you listen to Keith's definition, it's a little bit ambiguous because we can't even understand what that means. And it's probably written that way for a reason. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. As we go on to the next question, I want to ask you this. Can you explain what use of force is and the levels to use of force?
Okay. Use of force. First level of force is my arriving at a situation in uniform. Okay, that's my presence. Putting your hands on a person to handcuff them with no resistance, that is a level of force. When you use a little bit more force, you grab the arm and put it behind the back into a handcuffing position. That is a level of force. These are all levels of force that you can use. The law, and we talk about the rule of law, the law says that a police officer is allowed to use force one level above the force that is used against him or her. The police officer is allowed to use force one level above the level of force that is used against them. Explanation. You put your hands up to fight a police officer, the police officer has the legal right to use his nightstick. This is not a battle of two men trying to prove who's the toughest in the street. The police officer's job is to arrest you and bring you before the magistrate. That's his job. So whatever force the person may use, the police officer is allowed to go one level of force, or one level above. You decide you're going to pull out a baseball bat at a police officer, the police officer is not pulling out his nightstick. That's not the level he's going to. He's going one level above, whatever that may means. You pull a gun on a police officer, he's not just going to show you his gun. He's going to go one level above. So this is what people have to understand about the use of force. Also, the use of force says any level of force used against a person when they're no longer resisting is excessive. No matter how minor it seems, it is excessive. You can chase a person, catch them, fight with them, get them handcuffed. The person can be bloody, you're fine. There was a fight between you and that person, you're fine. However, on the way to putting that person in the back of the police car, you kind of smack them on the back of the head. That is excessive. Just that easy. Excessive doesn't mean beating somebody up while they're on the ground. That doesn't mean that. Any level above against that person that is not warranted. If it's not warranted, it is excessive, no matter how minor it seems.
So I'll give you, New Jersey is one of the strictest states when it comes to use of force. So I'm gonna give you the core principles that we have. This is all public information, by the way. The core principles, there's 7 core principles in the state of New Jersey that each officer needs to live by pretty much. Number 1, to protect the sanctity of human life with no judgment. 2, de-escalation and force as the last resort. Force as the last resort. 3, reasonable, necessary, and proportional force when necessary. 4, deadly force as a last resort. As a last resort. 5, duty to intervene, which means the officer preventing other officers from escalating unnecessary force. 6, duty to render medical assistance. And 7, duty to report and review uses of force. So I gave those core principles because the national topic, use of force, is why did they go above and beyond. Here, it's a little different because, like Dalton said, you can do that, but there's strict guidelines that we have to follow under New Jersey law. So what you see on TV may not necessarily happen in New Jersey because of the strict laws of New Jersey. So what I want everybody to understand is this is a state-by-state thing when it comes to use of force. New Jersey being one of the strictest states on use of force is the reason why such incidents are very, very low here. So when you see things on TV that happen in South Carolina, Florida, any of the states like that, it's the law that they run by. So what they're getting away with, that you may think they're getting away with, is the local or state laws that they're abiding by, that they're also judged by. So I just want that to be clear when it comes to use of force. I mean, I'm not gonna repeat everything Dalton said because that's exactly, he gave you exactly what use of force means and the levels of it. I just gave you what New Jersey gives and the reason why, you know, states like ours are very low on the totem pole when it comes to that. And it starts with state laws.
Okay, one last question before we go to Q&A. Officer-involved shootings that result in serious bodily injury or death, do you feel that the punishments imposed upon the officers fit the crime?
That's a tough question, because if an officer is charged with excessive force, especially excessive force in the shooting death of a person, and he's charged, that officer can get, let's say, 30 years in prison. And if that's the law, that's fair. At the same token, if the officer involved in an incident and the courts decide that he gets 2 years in jail, this is the law. And because we're looking at the rule of law and the law and what we call justice going through a system, it makes the punishment fair based on the criminal justice system. And we can argue those points, but we only argue those points when it's a police officer. If a person in the street gets 6 months in jail for shooting someone, the community doesn't have that big of a concern. If the person is charged with shooting someone in our community and they don't get any time in jail, if they're found not guilty, the community doesn't have that much of a concern. But there's a great concern if the police officer doesn't get what the community believes they should get. But once you go through the court system, whatever the courts decide, the punishment fits the crime. That's the purpose for the justice system as we see it. So to answer the question, the punishment fits the crime when you go through the system, and however you come out on the other side. I can think I didn't deserve 30 years, but the court system said I do deserve 30 years. Guess what? I'm doing 30 years.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay. First question. How is the public expected to tell about the crime they see when good police are afraid to tell about the wrong they see on the police force for fear of safety?
That is a good question. I would say this, and I wish the person was in the room, but birds of a feather flock together. That is the truth. I have not experienced bad policing. I haven't experienced people not personally, I haven't been with cops that steal money, steal drugs, abuse people, because that's not who I am. And because that's not who I am, the cops that are doing those things are not going to do those things around me. So that's how easy it is. We're not hanging, Keith is not hanging, Kim is not hanging with cops who are stealing money, stealing drugs, robbing people, abusing people. Those are not the kind of cops that we're around. If you hear about that kind of activity, the first thing you're saying is, I don't want to work with him or her. So him or her ends up working with someone who's just like them. But I can't get involved in saying, I want to work with them so I can find out what they're doing, so I can tell on them. Because in the midst of that, I end up being a witness to some things, and I end up losing my job and going to jail. So just like the rest of you on your jobs, the people who you know that are stealing time and stealing big leaves of copy paper to take home and use on their own, I guarantee you, none of you really associate with those people when they're involved in these activities. So what people think that good cops are sitting around watching bad cops don't do these things in front of good cops because they know who the good cops are and that we're not going to get involved in that.
I'm gonna agree with that one. They do not do that in front of cops that might hold them accountable. I also believe, though, that this is the reason why some of these organizations were started just like we did. We hold each other accountable. I'm also going to refer back to what I just said about the use of force policy, that duty to intervene. It's a law now. So pretty much for us in the state of New Jersey, you see something, you pretty much got to step up and say something. There are laws protecting us to do that now, but this is also why we have organizations to protect each other. So when it does happen, if it does happen, it's up to us to call it out. But like Dalton said, that rarely happens in front of other good cops because they know who the ones are.
Next question from the live stream. Why aren't more police infractions adhered to, and police with known infractions are still able to be officers?
Police infractions meaning?
I'm thinking police infractions, when police have infractions, why aren't those infractions, I'm assuming, adhered to, meaning there's some kind of penalty, and then why do they remain on the force and on active duty, I should say, I guess. Yeah.
I spent my last 3 years in internal affairs, and it was a different experience for me. What I will say is there's a process that everyone has to go through, and every incident, every infraction is not a fireable offense. You have to have some kind of disciplinary action. It has to lead to things. So because an officer did something doesn't mean you think he should lose his job. The state says that's not enough for him to lose his job. Not only that, the community has no idea what kind of punishment Keith received. They have no idea. Keith did something, he was accused of something. The department may say Keith is getting 2 days suspension. The community doesn't know that. What they know is that Keith was accused of something, they made a complaint, and Keith is still on the job. The incident that Keith was found guilty of was not a fireable offense. And you cannot just fire someone based on a feeling, because most of you have jobs, and you know that some of the things that you may or may not have done wrong, you could have gotten suspended for it, but it wouldn't warrant you losing your job. So these infractions are dealt with. The community just doesn't know it, and sometimes the community thinks it's a fireable offense, and it is not.
And if I could just piggyback real quick, we also have what's called progressive discipline. So there are levels to how far we have minor discipline and there's major discipline. So as officers violate or have these infractions, they're able to go into a system and then they monitor these officers. And if they continue to engage in bad behavior, continue to break these policies and procedures that have already been set, then as they progress through that policy, then more harsh discipline is imposed upon them. And if it reaches the level that they are suspended and or terminated, then that is determined at that time.
Just before we hear from the floor, if any questions on the floor, let me ask this. If someone gets caught up, let's say they're arrested, how can someone advocate on their behalf? Like how do you work your way through the maze of law enforcement? Is there someone within departments that they can talk to help them understand what's going on, or is it just literally their families hiring an attorney? Because what you all are saying tonight, I mean, there are many layers, and it sounds rather complicated. So if I'm just John Doe on the street and I get arrested and I have family members who are concerned about this process, is there anyone in the department that is able to guide people through it, or is it strictly seeking legal advice?
If your complaint is that you were treated unfairly, you go to internal affairs. Okay. And internal affairs will handle the situation. That's what their job is, to find out if there was any wrongdoing. If it's just an arrest you're complaining about, then your concern is to get a lawyer and fight for yourself through the system. But outside of that, your issue could be with the police officer, like I said, which is internal affairs. You go to internal affairs, and it's very wide. You can go to any police department and complain about a police officer from any police department, and that police officer has to take, the police officer at the desk or internal affairs has to take that complaint. So if some person from East Orange showed up in Orange and says, I want to make a complaint against Keith in East Orange, that police department has to take the complaint and forward it to that agency. A person is never told, we can't take the complaint. You can go to the prosecutor's office. There's a process for making complaints. And if it's just an arrest you're complaining about that you don't think you should have been arrested, there's a system for that.
For what you were specifically saying, if you're involved in an incident that requires arrest, 9 times out of 10, whoever was involved in that situation kind of knows what happened. So it's not for us to share that information with any outside parties that's not involved in that. So when it comes to that, yes, that it would be blanket as you would have to get your legal help and then come to the department and then work through that. That's situational, and depending on the situation, there are advocates for different things. Domestic violence advocates, but those are for victims. So if you are in an arrest, you know, it's totally different. So.
This is sort of more than one question. My first question is, what is the main purpose of the police academy?
The purpose of the police academy is to train the individuals who know nothing about policing on how to do policing, how to enforce the law, and how to treat people like people. I teach in the police academy, and I'm lucky because I get to teach cultural diversity, crisis intervention, and racially influenced policing. I also brought in a group that teaches sign language to teach the police how to deal with the deaf community. So the academy is to bring a person in who doesn't know anything about the law and to train them in how the law should be enforced. That's what the academy is supposed to do.
So you're an untapped civilian. So it's just like military. You got to go in, discipline. You got to get that discipline. You got to be prepared for what you're going to go through everyday life. But you have to train for the things that we carry. We carry a weapon. You may be talking about individuals that maybe never carried or even looked at a weapon before. So now we need to make sure that they can handle that weapon before we put them out on the street. So that comes to that. You also want to make sure that person's in good shape to do the things that they may have to do on a day-to-day basis. So you need a period of time to get through that, just like any other military institution.
Okay. After a particular period of time of training, can that particular person be dismissed because they did not, what's the word I want, measure up to what they should have?
Absolutely. People fell out the academy all the time. You'd be surprised. My class was 150 deep. We graduated 100. So people fell out. It happens.
Even after the academy, in New Jersey, the police department has up to a year to deny your reemployment. At the end of your 12 months, the police department can check off, we do not wish to rehire. Period. End of story. There's really not even an appeal for that. When that agency decides they do not want to rehire you because you didn't meet the standard, at that point, you are dismissed from the police department where you've been working for a year.
That's correct. Everybody goes through a probationary period, and that's the one time that you can get fired for cause, and there's no explanation needed.
Okay, my last question. I'm riding along the turnpike or wherever, and the state patrol or the police officer in the city, his lights is on, and I'm saying, for what? But I pull over. 2 questions from this. Do I have the right to ask that police officer why? And if there's 2 police officers, why do I see them go straight to their revolver? One might have his hand on it, and that's it. The other one takes it off, takes the
The strap
strap off, yes. My question is, do I have a right to get an answer for my question? And why do they take things so seriously in reference to their weapons?
This Deacon Davis, this is serious. This is serious because the police officer does not know who you are. And like I said before, motor vehicle stops and domestic violence incidents are the #1 causes for police officer death. So the police officer wants to be ready because you can be sitting in the car. You could be the bad guy. And you're sitting in a car. When the police officer walks up to the car, all you do is start firing. And those are the situations. The police officer has no recourse. He's stuck, okay? And even if he unsnapped his gun, you got to jump on him automatically. Automatically got to jump. With that, let me also, your first question about your paperwork. You have the right to ask. You do not have the right to hold your paperwork ransom. So you can't say, why did you stop me? I'm not giving you my paperwork until you answer me. That you do not have the right to do. You can ask, and more than likely, you're going to get an answer either as soon as you hand your paperwork to the officer, he may tell you why he stopped you. If he don't tell you, it's gonna be on your ticket. Definitely gonna be on the ticket. But do you have the right to hold your paperwork ransom? The answer is no.
So, yes, you do deserve an answer. So yes, you can ask. When it comes to that, it goes. I know I made the joke earlier about Medea and having that thing in her purse, but like Dalton said, motor vehicle stops are one of the most common law enforcement deaths in the nation. If I'm not mistaken, the Oklahoma City bomber was apprehended on a motor vehicle stop. So it's not like, these things happen, and 9 times out of 10, it's just a heightened awareness of just trying to be safe. So I can't explain every officer's action as to why they may touch their weapon, but we are taught to have a heightened awareness when it comes to motor vehicles, because you just never know.
So this is a twofold question, partially in response to the answers that were given to the previous question. Notwithstanding the fact that New Jersey has laws about use of force, what we also know is that New Jersey has a long-standing history of racism. And understanding the insidious nature of racism and how it has impacted numerous sectors of New Jersey, creating significant wealth gaps, as well as segregated education and other things of that nature, and also infiltrated the police system and the way in which communities are policed differently. How do you address the very real concern that individuals may have when they see what they see on national TV and they may have experienced bias personally at home in New Jersey, even if it wasn't necessarily with the use of force? And the second part of that question is, how do you address the mental health of police officers if they are going into every situation with a car or a motor vehicle stop with the thought process that they may not make it out alive? And oftentimes policies only require psychological evaluations after certain situations like a shooting.
I'm going to try to unpack that, and I'm going to start from the end and go backwards. It's not, even though it is the leading cause of one of the leading causes of death for a police officer, you don't pull a vehicle over walking up to ask for a license registration. You don't approach your vehicle saying, I might die tonight. That's not the attitude. Your training covers that. Your training, everything you've done, your training experience, that covers your preparation. And that preparation is in your mind. It's a motor vehicle stop. And your mind registers these things without you thinking about it. It just registers that you're approaching a vehicle. If this goes this way, this is what's going to happen. The thought never comes to you, but your training and experience, that's in the back of your mind. So you're not approaching a vehicle thinking, you cannot do this job. Every vehicle you pull over, I might die, I might die. You can't do that. But your training tells you to approach the vehicle, be prepared for whatever may happen. And anything can happen. You can approach the vehicle not knowing who's in the car, and the person that you pull over all of a sudden starts to have a heart attack. You're going to handle that because you're prepared to handle it. So you're not going into these situations. As far as psychological exams, should there be more psychological exams? Maybe. Should police officers get checked more often? Maybe. I've had conversations with people who said that police officers should voluntarily go and lay on the couch. There's an issue with that. I have an issue with that. I decide that, you know what, I need to go lay on the couch and talk to a psychiatrist. While I'm on that couch, I say the wrong thing. I say something that psychiatrist has a responsibility to report. And once they report that, I lose my job. Do you think I'm going to volunteer to lay on that couch? So there has to be a situation where police can go, get psychological exams when they want to, when they need it, and their job is not always on the line. If it's warranted that you, after that evaluation, that you cannot be a police officer, I understand. But you can't ask me to volunteer for these things, because it puts me and my family and everybody at risk if I happen to say the wrong thing. And that's the protection we all want. We all want that. But there are psychological exams that police officers have to go to. Should there be more? Probably. But there has to be some protection that every little thing I say is not going to jeopardize my life and my family's livelihood, because I got to protect that. And it may not seem fair, right? But as a man, I have to protect those things. So that part, I hope that answers the last two. Yes. Racism. Racism is everywhere. I've been asked the question, do I believe there's racism in the police department? My answer is yes. Why? Because races go everywhere. Okay? And just for the record, all the races ain't white. Some of them look like me. Okay? But we have to deal with those folks. Again, the racist cop is not going to make racist jokes around me, because I don't make racist jokes. We're not going to play this game, because the same racist jokes you make about someone that don't look like me, when I'm not around, you're making those same jokes about me and my people. So do it exist? Yes. But you have to stand up and say you're not going to tolerate it. And here's a statement and a question. Just because a person is a racist, just because they're a racist, does it mean that they cannot be a police officer? Does it mean that they cannot be a good police officer? Does it mean that if they're white, they cannot treat black people fairly? That's not always the case. So you can be a racist, you can have your thoughts, but if you treat people like they're supposed to be treated, and somewhere along the line you're a racist, first of all, nobody's probably going to know it, but that's just who you are. You have this mentality you grew up with, but you come to work, you do your job the way you're supposed to, and you don't treat people differently based on their race. So we have to be careful when we want to dismiss every person that we think is a racist. I can think you're a racist. It doesn't make you a racist, and it's based on how you treat people, especially my people.
The answer to that question is diversity. To combat that diversity, we need to look like the communities we serve. Most of our local departments should look like us. Diversity. From the state level all the way down to your local, it should be diversity. If the state represents majority of us, we should look like us on the state level. But that comes with hiring, recruiting, all of it. So we need more of us to try to get into a profession. And that's what it comes down to, in my opinion, diversity.
Another perfect segue. The question I wanted to ask is, what are some of the growing pains that you've seen, right, with the police academies trying to recruit African-American men and women to join the police force?
That's an outstanding question. If I didn't know any better, I would have thought that I gave that to Mr. Prescott to ask. I am the president of the Bronze Shields of Passaic County. Keith is the president of the Bronze Shields, of East Orange Bronze Shields. There's also the Newark Bronze Shields. We constantly try to recruit our people to become police officers. And our young folks are not showing up. They're not showing up to do this job. And a lot of the reasons they're not showing up, because our older folks are telling them that you don't want to be a police officer. And then we ask the question, why are there so many white guys on the police department? Because their people are telling them, you want to be a police officer. It's a solid job. And I will tell anyone, being a police officer is not a job, it's a career. I worked 25 years to the day and retired with a pension. It's a career. And we're telling our folks, you don't want to do that. you don't want to be a police officer. Why not? And if you don't want them to be a police officer, send them to the fire department. These are real jobs for our people, but we can't argue that our police department does not look like our community when we're not telling our people to do this. And I know for a fact, minority recruitment is for real because we're doing it. But when we do a recruitment and you get in the room and there's 50 people there and there's 2 black folks, are the white folks going to get the training? Absolutely. We're not going to discriminate. We're going to train anyone that comes in that room. But if our folks are not coming in the room to get these real jobs that are hiring, you're not going to find any industry, any company right now that's hiring 30, 40, 50, 60 people at one time. The only place that's happening is public safety. And we're telling our people that this is not what you want to do. That creates the problem, Mr. Prescott, of why we don't have more African Americans going through the academy. If you come through the Bronze Shields program, not only do we recruit you, we train you. We give you everything you need. We walk you through the process. We walk you through what the interview process is like, how you should talk, how you should act, how you should dress. We take you through the physical part so that you are prepared for the academy. But I can tell you from experience, our people are not showing up. And we need to take more responsibility and allowing them to see that this is a real career that you can take, you can help people, you can save lives, and when you're done with that, you can retire.
And I think that also comes down to having a conversation a little earlier than we've been having. Even when I joined, I was 25. We had some cops that joined at 18, 19. At 18, 19, I wasn't even looking at the police department like that. So if we can have that conversation a little earlier, then maybe we can get to them a little earlier. So then that way, we can have the better chances for them to pass the background and pass the things. So that's one of the things the Bronze Shields is trying to do. We're trying to engage them a lot younger. So we're trying to engage, just like the military comes to you right out of high school. You don't have to go to college. You can come to the military. We need to do the same thing. Because people think sometimes, some departments do have different standards as far as education-wise, but majority, high school diploma, which means you can come right out of high school, come join the police department. So I think if we do a better job trying to recruit our people in high school, just like the military's been trying to, then we can get our people in our community.
Thank you. As we move into the final module of this discussion for this evening, dealing with the topic of mental health, let me ask you this. Do you think that law enforcement officers are provided the assistance they need when it comes to mental health?
Absolutely not. From the inside or from the outside. And the young lady asked a question about the psychological tests or psychological exams once you're on the job. You need to be able to talk to someone to deal with your own mental health. Your mental health is very important. And once we start to realize that your mental health does not mean you're crazy, you just need to do something for your mental health. A lot of us want to take vacations on a regular basis, like I do, for your mental health. That's important. But those are things that have to be talked about. If you're talking about the mental health of dealing with mental health of people outside of the job, again, you need to have access to crisis intervention, that you can call someone to help you deal with someone else's mental health issues. So it's very important. But mental health for police officers is very, very, very important. The police field is loaded with males. And everyone knows that males don't talk. Okay? I don't have an issue. I don't have a mental issue. I'm fine. Those are our words. Honey, what's wrong? I'm fine. You need to talk? No, I don't need to talk. I am fine. That's the way we are. But if there needs to be an outlet, and we do find outlets. Believe it or not, this conversation is an outlet because we get to talk about things that we don't normally get to talk about. So it's still an outlet. And you can feel that you're talking to someone, you're having a conversation. It doesn't seem like it's mental health relief, but trust me, it really is for the folks that are sitting up here. It makes a difference. So should there be more done for police? Should there be more done for police officers' mental health? Absolutely. But there has to be a delicate way to do it because, again, men, especially black men, who don't like to go to the doctor, are not going to sit down and have a conversation about our mental health. And the reason we're not going to have that conversation is because we're fine. We're fine. Okay? There's a T-shirt. It says, the way it's written, it says, I'm okay. But the letters they highlight is, I'm broken. all at the same time. So in other words, I'm fine. So can we find a way to fix that? We have to, for the benefit of the police officer, and so his mental health issue doesn't leak into the community.
So Dalton gave you the leading 2 deaths for police officers, and the third could easily be suicide. So when it comes to mental health, he's correct. We don't like to have those conversations. We don't like to have those tough conversations. But when it does come ahead, 9 times out of 10, it ends in suicide for us in our profession. We have programs, some programs, especially in this state. It's just hard for us to utilize them. I guess it's hard to speak about because I'm active and I'm the very same way. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to have those conversations. I don't want to sit down. It's probably going to lead into the next question that's coming, but it's difficult. It's difficult to say on our day-to-day lives while working that we want to kind of rehash what we've been going through or already been through in our years of service. So it's a tough one. But do we have all the assistance? No. Do we need more? Yes.
Now, with that being said, let me ask you, Brother Keith, do you feel that you have been desensitized in this profession?
Absolutely. I've been to funerals, I don't even cry. This profession puts you in a place, the emotions get taken out of it, and you go through it daily. It becomes second nature. Death, life, all of it, second nature. Go home, you argue with your family, second nature. You having arguments and they looking at you like, what's going on? And I had a bad day at work, but I'm not telling you that. I'm good. So desensitized, absolutely, very much so.
I had this conversation with the person I live with and my wife, and she said a long time ago that policing changed me. And I don't think it did, but it teaches you how to cover things up. So I'm not desensitized, I just don't react so much as the way you think I would. Because when everything is going crazy, I have to be able to keep my head. And these are the situations, man. Once you learn to do that in police work, you learn to do that in life. When all around you, people are losing their head, I got this under control. I can handle this. So what seems like me being desensitized to you is me dealing with it because it's out of control. But we've learned to mask it. Just deal with it. Just get through it. There's no trick. Your tear duct, what the nerve that controls your tear is right here under your nose. So if you think you're getting ready to cry, if you take a piece of candy and stick it in front of your upper lip, it will help control that. This is how you go to cop funerals. These are the things you have to do. You don't think about it. You just go and you do it, you get through it. You walk to the casket of someone you work with for years, you look, you keep going. That's it. Any feelings behind it? Nope. Is there really? There's a feeling behind it. You just mask it, you go about your business.
And part of it is the police culture. I mean, I was raised on, I was trained under the suffer in silence. So, I mean, that's just the way the culture comes, it's how you handle it.
Now, with that being said, do you think you ever recover from traumatic events that you've experienced?
Not at all. Not at all. I'm only 10 years in. I mean, this gentleman right next to me is retired. I can't imagine what I'm going to experience in the next 15, 20 left. Not at all.
I've seen things that no one should ever have to see. So the answer is no.
Thank you. And just to piggyback on what these gentlemen have said, 25 years in, I've seen a lot. Being a woman, I come from a different perspective sometimes than how men look at situations, and it's tough. But I learned to compartmentalize my feelings. I'm there to do a job. I'm there to offer a resource to my community, and that is my focus. Whatever it takes for me to do that job for that particular incident that I'm there to control, that is what I'm focused on. When it's all said and done, however I need to deal with it later on, then that's what I do. But while I'm working, I put it to the side and I do my job. And I think as law enforcement professionals, we've come a long way in terms of dealing with our emotions, dealing with mental health. There are organizations now that strictly work with law enforcement that keep everything private between you and that doctor. It doesn't get to your agency. Through the unions now, we have programs that have been established. We have peer counselors, people who get the actual training that they need to sit and counsel other officers, which is very much receptive in this day and age, because if I've been through it, I can understand what you're dealing with now. And we can have a genuine conversation to get through it. But I'd still say we have a long way to go, but in time, hopefully, things will get better. And with that being said, Pastor Owens, I will turn it over to you.
Can we give our host and our panelists a hand of praise? Amen. This is special shout out to Kim, to Dalton, Keith, for not only sharing, but their transparency. In just side conversations, they've just given me a different perspective about policing. I think we all come with our preconceived notions about what police do, what we think they do. They just at Dunkin' Donuts chilling. But the reality is it's life or death every time they clock in. And I wanted to humanize them because they are a part of this church, part of our family. And they're out in the streets. And so we celebrate them. This is part one of a two-part conversation. We're going to, late May, early June, have an even deeper dive into policing and justice. I want to move Kim from the host to have her speak about women in policing. And then we have one of our members is a social justice attorney. She's going to be on the panel next time to give a perspective along with our officers. And so I'm just encouraged about the dialogue that's going to take place this year. It's my belief that the church has to be the place of dialogue. I'm tired of having the dialogue or seeing the dialogue happen on social media. I'm tired of having conversations in barbershops or just within our family, but let's begin to have it with people who are in it so that we can receive real answers. That's the goal. We want to hear factual information that we can take with us to inform us. So again, to all of you who tuned in, we thank God. We said we were going to be done at 8 p.m. and we're going to hold to that. God bless all of you. Pray that you'll be able to join us this coming Sunday, 10 a.m. For our live stream. Again, we thank Kim and Dalton and Keith. I'm going to turn on in any last parting words you all want to share before we say goodnight.
First of all, I want to thank the pastor for even having this forum. It's very important that we get to talk to each other. And we had a conversation about this. Our community needs to be able to talk to police just like this and ask questions. It's very important that you understand certain things. When you look at a person like Deacon Davis and he has such an elementary question, because the question needs to be answered because we don't know. So you ask the question because I really don't know and can someone answer it for me? And you would think that everyone should know this, but it's not. It's not that way. So to sit down and have a conversation with our community, I know it means a lot to me, it means a lot to Kim, it means a lot to Keith, to be able to go through our therapy. So believe it or not, you all participated in our therapy and us being able to talk to you. So thank you for coming out.
Yeah, I want to thank the pastor for having this forum. This forum is necessary. It's one of the reasons why we are the presidents of our respective chapters of the organization. We want to give back. This is part of that give back, but it's also giving that necessary conversation to the community that needs to be had, and we're here for it.
Lastly, I would just like to say, Pastor Owens, thank you for the opportunity. This is something that has been long overdue, and like he said, this will not be the last conversation we have, but I thank you all for the opportunity to participate this evening, and I look forward to the next discussion that we will have soon. So thank you all.
All right. God bless y'all. Good night. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. All right.